Hi, I'm Kerwin and welcome to an extended edition of the Washington Minute, and I'm here with Senator Chris Coons, our senator from Delaware. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Kerwin. Good to be on with you again.
We appreciate you coming on anytime, but as you know, a lot of things are going on in this country.
Absolutely.
First and foremost, we have to deal with the most important thing, I think, in regards to Delawareans, and that's COVID. Kids are going back to school, and from everything that I'm seeing, they're doing their best to go back safely.
Yes.
What feedback would you give, or advice would you give to parents that are letting their kids go, like my kids, for the first time in a year and a half? Today, thank the Lord.
I have a lot of parents in my office on my team who also are saying, thank the Lord, they can come back to work full-time knowing that their kids are back in school full-time. This has been a long year and a half, and we've seen a lot of education loss, but the public safety, public health implications of the pandemic made for a lot of hard choices last year. I don't think we can afford another year of learning loss for kids, and our teachers and paraprofessionals and school district leaders worked their hardest to continue connecting to kids virtually in the last year, but there's just no replacement, particularly for young students, for the social impact of learning together. I think there's just no replacement for a teacher being able to actually see their students and interact with them. Because of broadband access and equity issues, because of the difficulty of engaging remotely, lots of students just did not engage remotely with learning last year. I commend and thank the leaders of our school districts and our governor for everything they've done. And I'm hoping that this will be a safe and successful school year for our kids. A big part of what we did in Congress in the last year was provide robust funding to school districts and to states and to public health entities to set up testing, vaccination, and to make accommodations at schools in terms of air handling equipment and personal protective equipment and barriers. Obviously, in the first few months, that took way too long, but I think we're now in a place where we can reopen schools safely with distance, with accommodation, but I'm holding my breath.
I'm trusting in the resiliency of our children. They always seem to bounce back, and I'm hoping that they will do that. Once they see their friends, they're with their colleagues in their class, they're back at recess with their friends. I think they're going to do a great job.
One of the accomplishments here in Delaware that has not been repeated around the country is we hit President Biden's goal of vaccinating 70% of Delawareans by July 1. We have an overwhelming majority, a very high number of Delawareans over 65 vaccinated. We have 70% overall, but vaccinations for those who are eligible but young, school age, sort of 12 to 18, are not where they need to be. And I respect that there's a range of views about vaccines and vaccination, but bluntly, if kids are going to school, if teachers are going to school, if families have kids going to school, get the vaccine if you possibly can. That's how we promote public health and public safety and get out of this. There has been a significant surge in cases and in hospitalizations and in deaths that directly correlates with where people did not get vaccinated.
Senator Coons,
around the country,
I don't know what I need to say. I've said it till I'm blue in the face. Friends and colleagues have said it too. What would you say to folks that have just not gotten the vaccination or believing in this misinformation? What would you say to them?
The vaccine is safe. The vaccine is effective. The vaccine has been thoroughly and properly vetted. The FDA has now given full approval to the core set of vaccines, and I've been vaccinated since January. The overwhelming majority of my family and friends and coworkers are vaccinated. I have seen people genuinely struggle who've gotten sick because they didn't get vaccinated, and I know several folks, not directly, but members of others' families, who died because they did not get vaccinated. Being vaccinated doesn't mean that you cannot get COVID. You can still get COVID, particularly the Delta variant, which is more infectious, but it will not result in death, and it will probably not result in vaccination. So 3 of my colleagues are currently quarantining at home with COVID. I've been in touch with them. They're all 3 fully vaccinated. They didn't feel great, but they pulled through. That's the key difference. The vaccine prevents COVID from overwhelming you and putting you in the ICU.
Hopefully
this is a hard moment.
Hopefully this year, this time next year, this will be behind us. we'll have a better conversation of folks that we've pushed through this vaccination issue.
I hope, but there is no other way that this ends well, that our economy recovers, that our schools reopen, that our society reopens, other than people deciding to get vaccinated. That's what protects us from measles and mumps and rubella, from scarlet fever, from,
Right.
I got vaccinated before I could go to school. That's why we didn't have mumps and measles roaring around in the elementary school that I went to. I believe in vaccines, and I believe in science.
Positive note. For the past, I guess, month and a half, you and I have been talking about infrastructure.
Yes.
We've talked about it in D.C.
More than a month and a half. I mean,
Right.
Nationally, we've been having a conversation about infrastructure for years.
Right. Now, finally, we have a bipartisan vote that passed.
It
Please
passed.
tell us a little bit about that.
It passed. That's what we got done in August, was we passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill that will put an enormous amount of money, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, into roads and passenger rail, airports and seaports, broadband access, clean water, safe, sanitary, wastewater disposal and clean water, and that's going to begin to flow out to the people of the United States once the House passes it and sends it to the president's desk. It's cleared the Senate, and this was a big bipartisan accomplishment, but it hasn't passed the House yet, and I am hoping they take it up in September and send it to President Biden's desk.
I'm confident that they will. Now, what most people are thinking of, how does that affect me in Delaware?
It depends. It's going to help fix potholes in our roads. It's going to help upgrade resources like taking the train from New York to Washington. That should get faster and safer and easier. It's going to help with broadband access. So I was just talking to Governor Carney with the congressional delegation about this. We think there will be $100 million that comes through this infrastructure bill to Delaware that will make it possible for every household in Delaware to have access to broadband. That's a huge transformation.
Just for education alone, we saw that as a big deficit when we were
distance learning, distance working, and distance health are now all services that can be provided to every Delawarean once we build that out. So what difference will it make? Some of them you won't even really notice. You'll stop swearing when you hit the big pothole and you're like, did I lose a tire? Or you may notice that it's easier to get in and out of the Philadelphia airport, or that it's easier to take a train to Washington or New York for the day, or that things seem to move more efficiently. Folks will be frustrated for a little bit because there's going to be more construction.
That's what improvement is.
There's going to be more bridges, there's going to be more highways, and we're going to fix things. But we're going to invest in our port, for example. We're going to invest in the airport at Philadelphia and the ones here in Delaware. An enormous amount of money will go into upgrading our infrastructure, which we've allowed to gradually slip behind our competitors for decades. This is a big deal.
So when it comes to our ports, people, I don't think they know enough about it, especially the one in Wilmington, and how we do global commerce.
Sure.
And your office helps with that.
Absolutely. So the Port of Wilmington is a specialty port that mostly focuses on produce. It may surprise you that it is literally the #1 port on the entire East Coast for landing bananas. Those bananas come from countries like Guatemala and Colombia, both of which I've recently visited, to talk about increasing their exports into Delaware because that creates jobs at our port. I've also worked hard on exporting chicken. We grow a lot of chicken in Delaware.
We're good at it.
Sussex County grows a ton of chicken. And in order for us to continue having growing opportunities, we got to find ways to export that to hungry parts of the world. And so I've worked, whether it's on exports to South Korea or China, or South Africa or Ukraine or Russia. That's something I've worked on in my decade in the Senate.
But it's also building relationships with other countries.
Absolutely.
That is like right here in Delaware and making that known. And that's what you do as Senator.
Absolutely. I'm the co-chair of, believe it or not, the Chicken Caucus in the Senate. We have a bipartisan group. Part of what we've done is to work with the administration to make sure that during the pandemic, Delaware poultry growers and chicken growers around the country got access to some of the emergency funding that wasn't otherwise available. Historically, if I'm growing wheat or corn or soybeans and I have a terrible crop because of a hailstorm or because of a drought, there's emergency funding, there's insurance, crop insurance from the federal government. That didn't exist for people who were growing poultry. Now there is, for the first time ever, a program that will provide some price support for poultry growers where, because of the pandemic, there was a dramatic, sudden, sharp collapse in their ability to sell their product.
So when you're dealing with these other countries, like what else? People want to know, what is our senator doing? What else are you dealing with? So you mentioned South America and talking to them about how things relate here in Delaware.
So I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee of the United States Senate, and I'm the chairman of the committee that's responsible for funding our State Department and USAID, which does development projects around the world. I have recently spent more time on the Western Hemisphere. I went to Colombia and to Ecuador for a few days each, countries I'd never spent any significant time in. I met with both presidents, President Duque, President Lasso. I met with their cabinets, and I met with their militaries, their police, with civil rights and human rights advocates and activists, with folks who are business leaders interested in either exporting to the United States or importing from the United States. And I got to see some activities on the ground, things that we are funding through our State Department or USAID, to have a better sense of its impact. Colombia is our closest security partner in the Western Hemisphere, really, other than Canada. In Latin America, we have had the longest, closest relationship with them through something called Plan Colombia that began 20 years ago, principally because they're the world's largest source of cocaine, and cocaine coming into the United States has a tremendous negative impact on our society.
Absolutely.
They are also a country from which thousands of people seek to migrate to the United States illegally. And so one of the other challenges is figuring out how to have a legal migration system but prevent illegal migration northward. It's also a country that has a vibrant society and economy and culture. There's a very large Colombian diaspora community in the United States as well. So,
were there favorable discussions on both sides?
Very favorable. They are very pro-American. The current government welcomes and is excited about continuing to extend our partnership. So I got to visit, for example, a naval special warfare unit that does interdictions of cocaine shipments by narco-traffickers on the high seas from Cartagena.
Work.
Very risky and dangerous work, but it's our Navy SEALs and our DEA that have helped train them in this work. I also got to see a coca field, which is how cocaine is produced, is you grow a plant called coca, where they're chopping down the Amazon in the middle of nowhere, planting coca, and then refining it and shipping it out. That helps finance a guerrilla group, the FARC, or FARC dissidents, that are continuing to fight against the Colombian government. And that's also very dangerous work. So I got to see that in both the Amazon headwaters, that's the easternmost part of Colombia, and in the Caribbean coast, that's the northeasternmost part of Colombia. Colombia is also a country from which a ship filled with bananas leaves from Santa Marta every week for Wilmington, Delaware. So there are connections across a wide range of issues. Venezuela, which is just east of Colombia, is currently genuinely suffering under the dictatorship of Maduro, who is not recognized by the United States or Colombia or a dozen other countries as a legitimate government. There are millions of refugees from Venezuela in Colombia. We are trying to provide some support to the Colombian government for their hosting 1.8 million refugees and encourage them to stay in Colombia and hopefully return to Venezuela when circumstances there improve. Last point, both the Colombian and Ecuadorian governments have a critical role to play in climate change. The headwaters of the Amazon are the easternmost part of both of these countries. The Amazon is the lungs of our planet, and there is a lot of efforts to chop down the Amazon for illicit products like coca and other things, cutting down timber, wildlife trafficking, and we are partnering with both of those governments on combating climate change and protecting biodiversity in those countries.
Climate change has to be a huge thing. You're taking away the rainforest. You're taking a big gap out of that, and the role that plays throughout the world.
That's right. And the other thing that's special about Ecuador and Colombia is they're what's called mega diverse countries. There's an enormous amount of biodiversity, lots and lots of different species of birds and plants and animals in the rainforest. That also is something that we're seeing, that we're losing at a rapid and accelerating rate. Last, while I was there, developments in Afghanistan moved fairly quickly. And so I asked both presidents, our ambassadors did, I did, if they would accept Afghan refugees. Colombia committed to accept 4,000, Ecuador to accept 3,000. That's what we're asking of some of our best partners around the world, is to provide support for the more than 120,000 Afghans who've been evacuated now by the United States from Afghanistan and need a third country where they can safely rest for weeks or months while we vet them for whether or not they will ultimately be admitted to the United States.
So what role has your office played in this, I guess, recent events in Afghanistan? And I know people have reached out to your office for assistance, right?
Roughly 400 Delawareans have referred cases to my office of family members or service members. In some cases, this is someone from the Delaware National Guard who has an interpreter who served alongside them, who they are desperate to get out safely from Kabul. In other cases, it's someone who's calling or writing about their brother-in-law, their cousin, their father-in-law, who worked as a contractor with an American company or with our military, or who are just relatives who they're concerned about in Afghanistan. We've handled hundreds of cases in the last 2 weeks. Given that the war in Afghanistan, the American military presence in Afghanistan has ended, we're going to continue working those cases where we can to find alternate routes of evacuation, and we're now beginning the process of helping support them as they relocate to Qatar or Germany or other countries, as I just referenced.
So dealing with safety and security in Afghanistan, when do you foresee stability in it, if any?
Well, there hasn't been stability in Afghanistan in decades. Afghanistan is a country that's been at war for more than 40 years. I'll remind you, the Soviets invaded and occupied
They left their
Afghanistan.
stuff there.
They left a lot of their stuff there. Then there was a civil war. Then, because Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11, we invaded, and along with our NATO partners, we were at war in Afghanistan for the last 20 years. The Taliban are now in control of much of Afghanistan. They will genuinely struggle to assemble a government and produce anything like a functioning government. There are other groups within Afghanistan, like ISIS, Khorasan, ISIS-K, or Al-Qaeda, that do not necessarily partner or work with the Taliban. And there's other groups in the Northeast that are beginning to fight the Taliban directly, remnants of the Afghan National Army that we supported and trained and equipped. It's a mess. It is a very difficult situation in which for the United States to continue to be engaged in a counterterrorism mission, not a nation-building mission, is possible from over the horizon, from our facilities in the Middle East and elsewhere, but more difficult. In the last 10 years, every time I've gotten a classified briefing on the war on terror and where we face threats from, and when I have visited Afghanistan, I've been struck that we are consistently briefed that there are other countries where there are greater threats that face us, whether it's Somalia or Nigeria or Yemen or other places. And we are able to confront those threats and engage with those threats without having tens of thousands of troops on the ground. We have an ongoing difficult challenge for this country in that terrorism in the 20 years since 9/11 has metastasized to a dozen other countries around the world. We did gain 20 years in which there was no successful large-scale attack on the United States from outside the United States. And in Afghanistan, our brave troops and their partners killed virtually all of the senior leadership of the groups that we were fighting in Afghanistan. But the fact that the Taliban are now in control and that they will be celebrating this moment of victory for them does mean that we have to be more vigilant, more engaged, and that Afghanistan may reemerge as a place from which there are threats comparable to the threats in a half dozen other countries.
What would you say to the optics of the United States right now? It seems as though we're leaving with work undone. How do you think the rest of the world sees us?
I'll tell you, the first time I went to Afghanistan was over a decade ago. And my question back to you would be, what is the work that's undone? When our mission in Afghanistan was expanded several presidents ago, our initial mission that took us into Afghanistan was a counterterrorism mission. It was to say, this was a base for a group that attacked us, we're going to attack them. We accomplished that, I'd say, within a year. We then took that 1-year war and refought it 20 times and expanded it to a nation-building mission, to a mission that was, let's try and develop a stable democracy and a modern, sort of Western-oriented society in Afghanistan. I have been to dozens and dozens of countries around the world. I've never seen a place as remote, as rugged, as underdeveloped, and as deeply lacking in a national culture as Afghanistan. And that was a Herculean effort to try and build a modern government and national army and military in Afghanistan. And we dedicated 20 years, thousands of American lives, tens of thousands of partners' lives, and nearly $1 trillion in doing so. That work of building a modern democratic nation in Afghanistan, yes, that remains undone. I'll tell you, it was almost undoable. If we had remained in Afghanistan with 10,000 or more troops for another 20 years and another $1 trillion, I'm not convinced it would have ever happened. I do think that those who served and fought in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, and those who made the ultimate sacrifice on our behalf, whether it was at the beginning or at the end, whether it was in the evacuation effort or whether it was when we first went in, won something valuable for our country. They helped us secure 20 years of relative stability and security from attacks by foreign terrorist organizations, and that gave us 20 years to build a global network of partners, to strengthen our defenses, and to focus on other places in the world from which there are greater threats.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Coons, for being with us here today. We appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you again on the Washington Minute.
Thanks for a chance to be on with you today.
No problem. Thank you, Senator, as always.